Adam Amin is on the play-by-play call, and he joins us as he does most Fridays at this time. Even though it's a game day for him, he's with us this morning. Good morning, Adam.
Good morning, my friend. Happy day after Thanksgiving to you.
Thank you so much. You always seem to have not always the best game, but always an interesting game, and certainly that's the case again. You got an in-state rivalry. You've got Bud Foster, the longtime defensive coordinator of Virginia Tech, under a lot of fire. A lot of people wondering if this will be the final go-round for him with that position. You've got Virginia coming into Blacksburg, trying to get what would be a huge win for them. How do you see this game?
Yeah, it's interesting. We've already been around a couple of games this year where we've seen streaks come to an end. And, I mean, you understand rivalry weekend, and regardless of what Auburn's record is or if Alabama's 1 or 6 or not ranked, whatever it may be, you know how important those rivalry games are. And for Virginia, who is having a really solid run under Bronco Mendenhall in his third year, they haven't beaten Virginia Tech since 2003.
That's right.
So there's a lot on the line today in terms of that. And Virginia Tech is still battling for a spot in the bowl game. It's conditional for them. They're 4-6. Had a game earlier this year knocked out, wiped away due to Hurricane Florence. So they have to win today. If they win today, they'll schedule a game for next week against Marshall, and then they'll have to win that game to get to a bowl game. And right now, Virginia Tech has the longest active NCAA-recognized bowl streak in the country at 25. Florida State's sitting at 36, but that's not necessarily recognized by the NCAA.
Right.
There was a vacated win in there. So, some of the complications of all that, but a couple long streaks are on the line going into today. So that alone is enough to kind of make this an intriguing game. Bronco Mendenhall's defense has been really good this year. Bryce Perkins, who was in the same quarterback room as Blake Barnett over at Arizona State for a little while, broken neck when he was at Arizona State, goes to JUCO, goes to the junior college title game, and lands at Virginia. This kid, Bryce Perkins, is the real deal. And it's been fun. It's been fun to watch how this town has buzzed over the course of the last 24 hours or so getting ready for this game.
I mentioned Bud Foster, recognized one of the best defensive coordinators in the country. It's been a tough year for him. What's the chatter up there in Blacksburg? Do you think he'll be back next year, or is this going to be it?
And that's something we're going to discuss because, you have to think about it, don't you? I mean, he's 59 years old. He's been doing this since I was 9 months old at Virginia Tech. And I just feel like at some point, when do you cash in? I mean, he's making nearly $1 million a year. He's made plenty of money over his career. He's had some physical issues over the course of this season that has limited him in terms of where he's been. He's not been on the field as much. He's been up in the booth a little bit more as of late. So I wouldn't be shocked, and that's certainly going to be a conversation that we have, but I wouldn't be shocked if Bud Foster says, next year is my final year, and let me call it a career after that, because it's been a long time that he's been at Virginia Tech, going back to the Beamer era, and people understand how important he is to the fabric of this program, but this has been a defense that struggled this year. I can understand some frustration. I wouldn't be shocked if we're getting towards the end of Bud Foster's career at Virginia Tech.
Let's get to the Iron Bowl. You know the numbers. Alabama under Saban is 7-4 against Auburn, but no team in the country has beaten Alabama more since Saban's been here than Auburn. Gus Malzahn's got a couple of wins, 2-3 as a head coach. He was also on the staff in 2010 as the offensive coordinator with the Cam back. So Auburn's had success. As I said, Alabama's 7-4 against them under Saban, but still, that's a lot more success than anybody else has had. Auburn won the game last year, 26-14 at Jordan-Hare. They're the only team to beat Alabama in the last 2 seasons, so they can take, I think, some good feeling from that. Having said that, Alabama's at home. They're a 24.5-point favorite. Saban has not lost back-to-back to Auburn ever as the head coach at Alabama. The Tide is going to want some payback. Auburn's offense has been not what they needed it to be, clearly, and that's caused their defense to wear down in some games. What's your outlook, your feeling on this game?
Yeah, I think this is a different season than last year, obviously, and it's definitely a different Auburn team than it was last year. And I think the point of this is what you just talked about. The defense is what worries me. Being on the field, as much as I feel like Auburn's defense might be on the field in this game, there's only so much you can do in trying to slow down the tempo against Alabama. And when you're not built for it, and I just don't feel like Auburn's at its best when it's really going slow tempo. So if they're inefficient offensively, which is not a stretch to the imagination against the number one Alabama team that's had a really good defense all year and has pitched a couple of shutouts in SEC play, I feel like this is still there's a lot stacked against Auburn here. And this is a different Alabama offense than we're used to talking about this time of year, Gary. I think that's the other thing. And that's been the storyline all season in Tuscaloosa, is the fact that we know the defense is good. They always show up. They show up for big games. We know that, we saw what they did against LSU, that we saw the back-to-back shutouts. I think people focus on that, and rightfully so, but this is a year where we haven't focused on that as much because of the explosion of the offense. And this is a different Alabama offense than Auburn's defense is used to seeing when we get to this point of the season. So to me, this is still Alabama. I think the line is still like better than 3 touchdowns or right around 3 full touchdowns, something like that. I don't know if it's that. I think Auburn can cover this game. I think they can keep it closer than 24 points, but I just don't think there's going to be much here. I think Alabama jumps out early. I think maybe Auburn can make it interesting late in terms of that line, but I just don't see it happening. I think Alabama's in good shape going into the SEC championship.
Let me ask you about the perception of Alabama. Has it changed in the last few weeks? I know that the ESPN ratings formula has Clemson ahead of Alabama. I saw this morning that if they played on a neutral field, according to the ESPN, is it the FPI? Is that what they call it, Adam, or whatever it is they use, would have Clemson as a slight favorite. And you look at Alabama, they hit that tough stretch in November, even though they shut out both Mississippi State and LSU. Offensively, particularly against Mississippi State, they struggled in the first half last week against the Citadel. They struggled, although I thought they got back in their rhythm a little bit in the second half. They're scoring 40 points. But perception-wise, is Alabama viewed differently than, let's say, they were in Week 8 when they were just steamrolling everybody?
No, I think it speaks more to Clemson than anything else. Because look at what Clemson's done in ACC play. Mm-hmm. They had like the one close game against Syracuse, where they ended up winning by 4, and then like 3 against Wake Forest. I think they gave up 7 against a decent NC State team. They held Florida State 10 points. They crushed Louisville, although everybody's crushed Louisville this year. They go to Boston College and only give up 7. They played Duke last week, and while it's a one-possession game at halftime, they hold Duke to nothing in the second half. I think that it speaks more about Clemson than it does Alabama, and the fact that every opponent since, the 4th or 5th week of the season that Clemson has played, it's been a domination. Their schedule has been easier, certainly, than Alabama's is, but if you're going to give Alabama the same credit for beating up on, a cross-divisional opponent that's not very good, or a bottom-of-the-barrel SEC team in the West that's not that great come this time of year, you got to give Clemson the same credit for beating up on an ACC Atlantic that has a little less talent at the bottom, and beating up on some coastal teams that are good in their own division but not so great in the crossovers. So you got to give Clemson the same credit that you give Alabama for beating up on teams, and they've beat up on teams as much as anybody in the country this year.
That's right. It's rivalry weekend, so way too many games for us to run down, but I got to ask you about Michigan at Ohio State. And I was thinking about when Saban got here to Alabama. Auburn had won 5 in a row. Then they won the first year at Auburn in 2007. So it was a 6-game winning streak, and they came to Tuscaloosa in 2008 and wound up being Tuberville's last game against Alabama. The Tide thumped them 36-0. So not only did they snap the streak, they snapped it with an exclamation point. And I kind of get the feeling that could happen for Michigan this year. I know Ohio State's got the terrific record, but just a lot of chinks in that armor. Michigan's defense, I think, is the best in the country. Shea Patterson has given them a lift, clearly, as a big-time quarterback on offense. I think, Adam, not only is Michigan going to win this game, I think they're going to win it double digits. I think they're going to win it going away. And now you may have an entirely different feeling, and that's what I'm going to ask you about. But I really think it's Michigan's time.
I don't think it'll be a double-digit game because I think Ohio State's offense is good enough to at least keep it close. But I'm with you. I think this is it. I think Michigan's winning this game. I've been saying Michigan's going to win this game for the last month. I'll give credit to my partner Rod Gilmore. He's been saying Michigan's going to win since early in the season, really since they started to surge after that Week 1 loss against Notre Dame. And I think Michigan's defense, you're right, they have as good of a secondary as anybody in the country. Maybe this side of Washington. They're aggressive at the line of scrimmage. They jam you. They press you. It's going to be tough. Chase Winovich is banged up, and he's an outstanding defensive end who does a lot in terms of the pass rush game. But I think there's a lot of depth up front for Michigan. And we've seen the defensive issues that Ohio State had. They gave up 51 points to Maryland last week. They should have lost that game. And frankly, they've looked very bad against two average Big Ten teams. And let me go and say above average. I think Purdue and Maryland have played at times at an above average level this year, but they have absolutely crushed those two. Those two teams have absolutely crushed that Ohio State defense. Purdue and Maryland showed that there's a lot of flaws in Ohio State, and this is a flawed Ohio State team, which I feel like we've said just about every year, and somehow they sneak their way into the playoffs because they win. They win this game, and then they put up style points the Big Ten title game. But I think this is the year. Michigan's good enough. I think their offense is good enough. Their running game has been excellent. Karan Higdon might slice through this Ohio State rushing defense, like we saw Anthony McFarland, Booger McFarland's son, do last week for Maryland. I think this is the year. I think it's a less than 10-point game, but I think Michigan wins, and I think it's the first time since 2004 that they get a win against Ohio State.
You referenced Florida State's bowl streak not being officially recognized, but as far as consecutive years in a bowl, they have the longest streak. They've got to beat Florida tomorrow in Tallahassee to do it. And Dan Mullen, I know, is just nipping at the bit to get to Tallahassee and making an exclamation point that Florida is going to be the program in that state. Willie Taggart's had all kinds of issues, but we've seen Florida State rise up before against Florida and play their best football game. Any potential that they could do that tomorrow?
Man, I think there's potential. We've seen flashes of Florida State. I'm having trouble because I've seen both of these teams, and I've seen Florida play at some of its best, and I've seen Florida State play at some of its worst. And it's hard to kind of marry yourself away from that. It's kind of pry yourself away from that perception. If I take one big step back, I think Florida's defense is really good. And you guys know that. I haven't watched SEC football all year. You know that there's some studs on that defense. And I think Florida State has had so many issues at the offensive line position this year. Quarterback's been banged up because of that. They've had to go in and out and change quarterbacks because of that this year. I think Florida's defense is more than good enough. I think you're right. I think Dan Mullen kind of puts a stamp on this, and I think that bowl streak comes to an end. And it's a tough first year for Willie Taggart, but I'm just confident in this Florida defense. I've been confident in them most of the year, even in some back and forth games. I still think their studs play big against good competition, and I think they'll do the same. I think Florida wins this game.
In addition to your game this afternoon, we got several other Friday games, but I want to ask you about Oklahoma at West Virginia tonight because Oklahoma's they're right there in position. If anybody trips up to move into that college football playoff top four, and Kyler Murray's pushing Tua for the Heisman, they go to West Virginia with Will Grier at quarterback. West Virginia coming off a tough loss at Oklahoma State. How do you see this one?
A lot of points, like we expect when it comes to Big 12 play. But, I'm worried if I'm West Virginia's defense. They've had struggles with good rushing attacks and physical quarterbacks. I think Oklahoma State gave them issues last week. Sam Ehlinger gave them problems when it was Texas and West Virginia. Sam's a really good running quarterback. And I look at this guy, Kyler Murray, as maybe the most, and you can obviously defend Tua here, but I'll throw it out there just for the sake of throwing it out. I think he's the most electric player in college football at the quarterback position. I think as great as Tua is at a level of surgical efficiency this year that I think is unmatched. But in terms of dynamic explosiveness, I think Kyler Murray just has a little extra gear. And maybe that's just because Tua's hurt and he's been banged up with that knee issue. But I think Kyler Murray's got an extra gear. When we're comparing these two guys, Tua's going to win the Heisman. I think you can't be that efficient and not have people recognize it. But the explosiveness and dynamic playmaking ability of Kyler Murray, I think, is second to none. So that's what worries me about West Virginia. I think Kyler Murray has his biggest day. I think Oklahoma wins this game. I think they lock it up into the Big 12 championship. I think Texas probably wins too against Kansas, and that's your matchup, I think, in Arlington next week.
Can Washington State with Mike Leach break through tonight in the Apple Cup against Washington?
This has been the hardest game for me to think about because I'm not sure about that defense. And it's been an improving Washington State defense over the course of the last couple of years, going back to being a marked improvement last year and not as great as last year. And obviously Alex Grinch leaving has affected that, but I think they're a solid defense. I think they make enough stops, and I think their offense is great. We were just talking about Heisman candidates. Gardner Minshew is my number 3 right now. So that my top 4 goes Tua, Kyler, Gardner Minshew, and then Will Grier at West Virginia. I think Gardner Minshew is the best story in college football this year. I think Washington State's offense is fun, it's efficient, it's scary, it's explosive, and I think they can get just enough stops against the Washington offense that's been struggling all year, especially in the second half of the season. I think Washington State wins this. I think they finally break through. I think they go to the Pac-12 championship game, and I think they beat Utah.
Closing in on wrapping it up with Adam Ami. We always take him down as long as we can, even though he's got a game to get ready for. We'll let you go in just a second, Adam. I want to ask you about a little bit of NFL yesterday. The Cowboys pulled even with the Redskins in the NFC East, winning a game. And what had caught my attention was earlier this week, Jerry Jones, obviously proud of himself for acquiring Amari Cooper, and he made the comments that he thought Amari Cooper gave them a Michael Irvin effect with opening up the inside running game for Ezekiel Elliott the way that Irvin did for Emmitt Smith back in the day. And Amari had been efficient but hadn't been terrific, and that raised some eyebrows. But then yesterday, Cooper went out and was next level. 8 catches, 180 yards, 2 touchdowns, both those touchdowns, the 40-yarder and the 90-yarder coming on runs after the catch. And Jerry, they kept showing him in the press box, as they always do. You could tell he felt pretty good about himself. But when Amari Cooper does those things, it does make Dallas a different type of football team.
Yeah, and I think Amari Cooper on any football team makes you look smart. How much were the Raiders hitting themselves yesterday after Khalil Mack and Amari Cooper's performances? But I don't think that's too far off base by Jerry. That's his point of reference is going to be those high-level Super Bowl winning teams, and if he sees flashes of that and elements of that, then yeah, point that out, and I think that's fair. Having a good receiver is always with a decent quarterback is always going to make your running game look that much better. So when Dak Prescott was lighting it up a couple of years ago in 2016, and you had solid receivers, and Dez Bryant was having a solid season that year, of course Ezekiel Elliott looked great. So yeah, it's not hard. I'm not saying that this is a hard concept to grasp. You got a good receiver, it opens things up for your running back. You got a good running back, it opens things up for a good receiver. So it's a good move. I mean, that's all there is to it. How is it? Getting Amari Cooper is never a bad thing as far as I'm concerned. So I'm not shocked. And at the large scope of all this, Gary, I think this certainly does help Dallas and make them probably the favorite in what's been a jumbled NFC East in the opening half of the season, opening 3 quarters of the season. It's been jumbled throughout. I think this is going to help them separate.
And just real quickly, Adam, Drew Brees at 39 years of age. I'm not going to say underappreciated because I think everybody knows how good he is. But, maybe it's because he's 6 feet tall. Maybe it's because he's been in a quarterback era. But I don't know that he's ever gotten the full recognition that he deserves. I think he will this year with an MVP. He only threw for 171 yards last night, but still 4 touchdowns. Did have a pick, which was only second of the year. Have we seen a quarterback ever playing any more efficiently than Drew Brees is this season?
No, I think this is going to go down as one of the more efficient years. Brady's had a couple like this. Manning had 1 or 2 like this. I think this is certainly in what the NFL is now in the shifting landscape with more offenses being a focal point. And I think that'll continue to grow. Yeah, I think this is one of the better years you can have. And yes, he'll finally get that recognition. You would think he's like Leo DiCaprio. Oh, he's got to have an Oscar, right? And then, it took him a long time to get one. I think this is the year Brees finally gets that MVP. Is he underappreciated? Probably, but I think that has more to do with the era of the quarterback that we're in. He's growing up right alongside Brady, Manning, Rodgers, Russell Wilson. Anybody you want to throw up there is a high caliber. Joe Flacco is a Super Bowl winning quarterback. So I think it has more to do with the era that he's in than anything else. But I think we're seeing why Drew Brees is one of the greats.
Yeah, and he'll throw it to anybody. I was watching the game last night, and I kept expecting to hear Adam Amin on the touchdown reception. I mean, he would make you and he'd make us look good. Hey, great stuff as always, Adam. Have a good call today there in Blacksburg. Appreciate it, man.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it.